I just read an essay by a British author, 20-something years old, named Freya India, who is intensely focused on what's happening in the lives of teens and young adults, especially girls and young women. She's interviewed a lot of young people, and she says that they now live in an age where their lives are being controlled by algorithms, choices that are constantly presented to capture their attention, all designed by the most brilliant minds and artificial intelligences. And the algorithms really work, baby. She just emphasized that in her age group and younger, they're working. And they designed them to work like that. In the old days, like fewer than 10 years ago, kids looked at their Instagram account, for example, as stuff just came up naturally and chronologically. But in 2016, Instagram decided that kids, especially girls, needed more. They needed help with their feeds. Instagram began to serve up photos of influencers, beautiful women who make kids feel awful about themselves. And when they see these pictures, all these kids can think is, I wish I could look like that. Fuller lips, smooth skin, better butt, nicer nose. And that's what your kids are thinking. If you don't know that, pay attention and find out. Ask them. And kids began to do whatever it took to look like those pictures, and they're still doing it. Kids have their lips injected, perfect faces on these kids, but lips injected, noses chiseled, skin smoothed out with Botox, cheeks pumped up with filler, new breasts, and this is for teenage children. I saw a picture of an 18-year-old girl who was gorgeous by anybody's assessment. She would be swiped, I think it's right, every time. She's just gorgeous. And then she became immersed in the Instagram culture, and I saw her picture from a year after the first one that I'd seen. She'd had quite a variety of procedures, and she looked like a clown, with features exaggerated to match what she saw in women on her social media feeds. And then she woke up one morning, looked in the mirror, and shrieked, "Who is that?" And this happens all over the world every day. And even if your child hasn't had the surgery, it's very likely that she's wanted to have it and feels bad that she hasn't, which can be as depressing as having the surgery and regretting it. Studies prove that kids who regularly visit social media have much higher incidences of depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, and a host of other mental health problems. This has been proven in many studies. In Freya's words, these computer algorithms act like, this is a great term on her part that I hadn't heard, conveyor belts. If your girls hover over a photo for even a fraction of a second, the media platform picks up on that and serves them more photos, just like that. And she gets sucked even deeper into the abyss. The algorithm steadily and rapidly learns what keeps your girls watching. Your girl. The algorithm knows your kids, terrible to say, better than you do. The platform sends more photos, more videos, more sensational videos, anything to get your kids' attention, and then an endless conveyor belt of apps, products, services, pills, advice, support groups, and procedures to fix them. Suppose your girl is a little anxious or feels emotionally down. Who doesn't from time to time? So she looks up anxiety or depression, and the algorithm, bing, feeds her interviews with dozens, then hundreds of celebrities and influencers who tell her how she must be anxious and depressed. Now she goes from might be to she's got the diagnosis. They convince her. Then they teach her how to describe just the right symptoms and even facial expressions. They teach them how to do this with their faces so that she can manipulate you and doctors for sympathy, maybe therapy, maybe medications, maybe surgery. They're teaching her how. Or people teach her how to starve herself so that she can be beautiful and get attention. Or they teach your daughter how to cut herself in ways that feel strangely satisfying or empowering. They'll even teach her how to share her experiences in dramatic ways with her friends, online and in person. The algorithms bring ideas and images and people right into your little girl's brain like a pipe, and they'll teach her how to say the right things and how to behave. Brief pause. Great big burst of thunder. There we go. We'll just keep going. They'll teach her how to say just the right things and how to behave so that she can be diagnosed with whatever, like with ADHD or depression or anxiety disorder or gender confusion. So many people appear to be crazy eager to help your girl, but they're really helping themselves. They get her to subscribe to their channel, buy their training, get their supplements, use their medications, and spread the good word to her friends to do the same. And the entire carnival is getting more elaborate and clever. This girl, young woman, Freya, says, quote, "We went from watching influencers talk about anxiety to then live streaming their panic attacks and describing deeply personal traumas, all accompanied by pop songs. TikTok tells us that we have anxiety, autism, ADHD, traumatic stress disorders. Videos present symptoms that are more and more vague so that everybody can find themselves in any number of diagnoses. For example, they might ask, 'Are you sometimes distracted?' they say to your girl. You might have ADHD. You need Ritalin. Pay for this virtual therapy app and get medication delivered to your door. And all this can happen before you've realized it, or you may not even realize that she's taking it." Mental illness has now become what is called socially transmissible. We all know that colds are transmitted by viruses, and now mental illness is transmitted by social interaction, most of it online. Kids are adopting the symptoms of their friends and even total strangers. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, is finding outbreaks of mental illness, something never before identified. Clusters of people in neighborhood schools and online groups who all have the same symptoms, word for word, of the same mental illness. There is a hashtag mental health on TikTok, with over 110 billion views at last count. That's 14 views per person on the planet, including little kids and people in places without internet access. This is how gender confusion has spread. Children do not suddenly acquire a biological dissatisfaction with their gender. Let me say it again. Children do not suddenly acquire a biological dissatisfaction with their gender. No, they are exposed online and by friends and adults who have been online to the idea that changing gender might relieve their emotional pain, which is really caused by the lack of unconditional love in their lives. Kids are being sold on diagnoses and identities that they don't have. We're all being sold lies, and we feel desperately unloved and alone, so we buy the lies. Yeah, kids are human beings who are supposedly capable of making their own choices, but kids' brains are still developing, and the mind of a child or teenager doesn't stand a chance against the clever, experienced onslaught from trained, brilliant machines and psychologists who are trying to enslave that child. Enslave. I wish I were exaggerating, but I'm only being bold because almost nobody's paying attention. I sometimes feel like we're watching a large train tipping off the tracks while we shrug our shoulders and hope that it will be okay, instead of slowing the train down, for example. Algorithms are training our children from a young age. Most of us barely deserve the title of parents anymore. We're overmatched, and we're not doing anything about it. Freya, the author, says that she speaks to many parents. She talks to them about the dangers of social media, and the parents do recognize the risks of their children talking to predators, for example, or being exposed to explicit self-harm and suicidal content. But parents are missing the more subtle risks, which are just as dangerous as the obvious ones. We're missing the profound risks of kids just watching makeup tutorials or following mental health influencers. They're jumping on a conveyor belt that never stops a belt that leads them to the destruction of self-esteem or doubt about their identity or a lifetime of therapy and medication. Whatever insecurity or vulnerability they're struggling with, they will be pushed further and further into it by the stuff they see online. They're taught to go further into it. Allow me to be blunt, like I haven't been. Phones are killing our kids, killing them. I'm not exaggerating. If something in their drinking water was poisoning their bodies, would we do nothing? No, we'd been up in arms. In fact, many communities have and just stopped the flow of city water. But in the face of our children being slowly poisoned and tortured emotionally and spiritually, we act like nothing's happening. What do the experts recommend as a solution to this poison conveyor belt? I looked for the best of the best advice. 1, to parents, they say, don't let your children open social media accounts until at least age 16. This, of course, it sounds good in some ways, but it's actually absurd. I personally have heard from a great many teens who have figured out dozens of ways of having social media accounts without their parents knowing. Easy. They use accounts at their friends' homes, for example. Social media itself is filled with tech wizards teaching your children how to gain access to social media without your permission. It becomes a contest between parental restrictions and kids working around them. It's just a game. 2, second recommendation from the experts. To parents, limit the time children spend on their phones. Ridiculous. Again, for all the reasons I just listed. Kids have all day to figure out ways to use their phones so that you're not aware of it. 3, to parents, prioritize their in-person interactions and encourage them to discover who they are from real-world experiences, not manipulative algorithms. Well, this one actually made me laugh out loud. Prioritize in-person interactions? What does that mean? What does it look like? Put the kids in karate class? The kids will still be there on their phone every minute that they're not in class. And that's if they don't ditch class or refuse class in the first place. If parents can't control their kids' phones, they won't succeed in requiring their children to prioritize in-person interactions. Eye rolling. 4, fourth recommendation. And this is experts to the young people. This reminds me of just say no to drugs. Get off your screens, they say. Delete the apps. What these continuous streams of content do is prevent you from taking a second to pause, reflect on who you really are, and realize where you are headed. Well, this is like telling an alcoholic to just stop drinking because it's bad for him. Not going to happen, ever. B, for a kid to voluntarily get off their apps, they would have to give up the only relationships that most of them have, virtual ones. Kids will not simply get off their screens on their own. C, reflect on who you really are and where you're headed, they recommend. Without the unconditional love of parents, a child cannot know who he or she is, nor can they know where they're headed. They have no clue. 5th recommendation, to legislators, they say, pass laws to limit the access of children to social media. This would involve impossible problems of freedom of speech, age verification, and the usual creativity of children in bypassing any restriction we come up with. 6, enact legislation requiring social media platforms to limit the content provided to children. Again, impossible issues of freedom of speech, age verification, and the usual creativity of kids in bypassing restrictions. Same. So those are the recommendations of the experts, which will not work. Now, it might not work. They won't. They've already been tried. So what is the solution? Easy. Isn't that nice to hear? Easy. Who brought these children into the world? Who has primary responsibility for them? Parents. But solving kids' problems is going to require a lot from the parents. And why shouldn't it? It's the parents' job. And What do children need from parents? Not phones, not a car, not lots of clothes, not entertainment. They need loving and teaching, which parents can learn in the parenting training at realloveparents.com. 30 years experience applying the principles in the parenting training. They work. And on the parents' part, this requires a great deal of work and a lot of practice. So until parents reach that place where they can unconditionally love their children, that's going to take time. Doing the parenting training, getting loved yourself, giving it to your kids. So in the meantime, till you get there, what can you do? Listen slowly. Most parents will stop breathing when they hear this. In the meantime, children do not need phones at all. Really, that'd be your first, at least get the sewage out of your house before you learn how to clean it up and build your children. Remove their phones entirely. They can associate with friends in person, at school, or your house, and then immediately, 80% of the parents in the room say, wait a minute, my kids need their phones to do their homework. No, they really don't. No school would make homework possible only on phones because some children can't afford phones, and schools can't withhold education based on income. It's actually illegal. And all their homework can be done on a laptop where the screen faces the interior of the room, where parents can observe what is happening on the computer. I know many parents who are raising their children without phones, and the children are much happier. Many parents and their children have written about their experiences, and the results are inspiring. These kids do better in school, have better relationships, and have fewer mental health diagnoses, depression, anxiety, and all the rest. So in the short term, remove the phone, but that's not enough, not nearly. Removing phones just creates a hole. It removes the superficial and brief connection of the internet, but remember that those shallow connections feel a great deal better to a child than nothing. So what do? You have to learn how to supply the deeper, more meaningful connections that your children need. You have to learn how to love them unconditionally, richly, fully, and you can. Learn how at realloveparents.com.